Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. This time we're tackling economics, a topic that I think we can all agree can sometimes feel like, well, a bit of a mystery.
Absolutely. It can definitely feel like that sometimes.
But luckily for us, we've got Kyla Scannon's book, New W in This Economy, How Money and Markets Really Work, as our guide.
Such a good one.
It is. And to make things even better, we've got insights from finance pro Morgan Housel, who actually wrote the foreword.
Oh, wow. Yeah, he's great.
He is. So get ready to decode the economy, because today we're diving deep into how it all actually works.
I'm excited.
Me too. So one of the things that really struck me about Scanlon's book is this idea of the vibe economy. Have you heard of that?
Yes. It's such an interesting concept, right? The idea that our collective feelings, like our overall mood about the economy, could actually influence how it performs.
Yeah, it's like, are we talking good vibes only and suddenly my portfolio is doing amazing?
Well, it's a bit more nuanced than that, but you're onto something.
Okay, good.
It's more about how our feelings, our expectations about the economy can lead to real-world decisions that actually impact things.
Okay, I think I need an example. Give me an example.
Okay, so think about the dot-com bubble. Back in the late 90s, everyone was so hyped up about the internet, right?
Yeah.
It was this huge thing.
Is gonna change the world.
Exactly. And that excitement, that positive vibe, led to massive investments in tech companies. People were so caught up in the hype that valuations skyrocketed, even if those companies weren't actually making any money.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that. I was pretty young, but I definitely remember my parents talking about it, and not always in a good way.
Right, and that's exactly the point. Those vibes, that exuberance, it eventually crashed back down to earth. Because at the end of the day, vibes alone don't pay the bills.
That's true. So it's like a reality check on the power of positive thinking, at least when it comes to the economy.
Exactly. And it shows how much psychology plays into all of it.
Okay, that's fascinating. So we've got vibes shaping the economy. What else does Scanlon dig into?
Well, she also takes us on a fascinating journey through the history of money itself.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Does she cover the whole, like, trading cows for goods and services era?
She does. She starts with those early forms of currency, like using actual cows or shells as payment, and she uses that to illustrate how money, at its core, has always been about trust.
Right, because if you don't trust that a cow is worth a certain amount of grain, that whole system falls apart.
Exactly. And it's fascinating to see how we've gone from cows to this incredibly complex system of digital transactions, global markets, fiat currency.
And speaking of, historical economic chaos, I was blown away by the fact that there was a time in the US when each state had its own currency. Can you imagine?
Oh, I know. Talk about a logistical nightmare.
Right. Try planning a road trip when you need a different currency for every state you pass through.
Talk about a headache. And that chaos is actually a big part of why establishing a national banking system was so crucial in the U.S.
It makes you appreciate the convenience of a standardized system, even with all its flaws, right?
For sure. But it wasn't all smooth sailing, even after creating a national system.
Oh, right. There was that whole free banking era, wasn't there?
Exactly. Think of it as the Wild West of finance,
Yeah.
a time of both innovation and, well, a fair bit of instability.
It sounds intense. So we go from bartering cows to the Wild West of banking, and now here we are with digital currencies and online trading. It's mind-boggling how much the system has evolved.
It really is. And through it all comes back to that fundamental element of trust. Today's money is essentially fiat currency, right? Meaning it has value because the government says it does.
It's true, which is kind of a wild concept when you really think about it.
It is, and Scanlon illustrates this whole idea of perceived value brilliantly with, of all things, luxury wine.
Okay, hold on. Luxury wine. How does that tie into the global financial system?
Well, think about it. The luxury wine industry is a multi-billion-dollar market, right?
Yeah.
But how many people can actually tell the difference between a $20 bottle of wine and a $2,000 bottle of wine?
Okay, that's a good point. I'm guessing not that many.
Exactly. A lot of the value, maybe even most of it, is based on perception, branding, and the belief that it should be worth that much.
It's like paying for the story as much as the actual grapes, I guess.
Exactly. And it highlights how much of our economic reality is shaped by these shared beliefs and perceptions.
It's like the economy runs on trust and a little bit of fancy marketing.
Pretty much. Which brings us to another core economic principle that Scanlon breaks down: supply and demand. But don't worry, we're not going to get bogged down in boring textbook definitions here.
Okay, good, because I was about to have flashbacks to Econ 101.
No worries. Scanlon does an amazing job of bringing these concepts to life with, you guessed it, more real-world examples.
Okay, hit me with your best example, the one that really makes it all click.
All right, how about this? Remember the pandemonium in the used car market a couple of years ago?
Oh, tell me about it. I was trying to buy a car then, and it was a nightmare.
It was a wild time. And it perfectly illustrates how supply and demand can turn things upside down. The pandemic threw a wrench in the whole supply chain, right? Fewer new cars were being made because of factory shutdowns and chip shortages.
Right, I remember hearing about all that.
So you've got limited supply, but then demand actually went up because people weren't traveling as much and were maybe a little wary of public transportation.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So suddenly, used cars became hot commodities. And because the supply couldn't keep up, prices went through the roof. We even saw this bizarre situation where, in some cases, older used cars were selling for more than newer models.
I remember seeing that. It seemed crazy at the time.
It goes against everything we think we know about depreciation, but that's the power of supply and demand in action. And then, of course, there was eggflation.
Ugh, don't even remind me. My grocery bills are still recovering.
Right. Everyone felt that pinch. And again, it all comes back to those supply and demand forces. We had outbreaks of avian flu wiping out flocks of chickens, which obviously impacted the supply of eggs.
Makes sense.
And on top of that, the cost of chicken feed was also going up because of global supply chain issues and inflation. So you've got less supply and higher production costs, which inevitably leads to higher prices for consumers.
So the next time I'm at the grocery store staring down a carton of eggs, I can thank supply and demand.
Exactly. It's the invisible hand behind so many price fluctuations we see in our daily lives.
Wild. So we've tackled vibes, the evolution of money, and the power of supply and demand. What other economic mysteries does Scanlon demystify?
Well, she also tackles a big one, GDP, or gross domestic product.
Ah, yes, GDP, the economic indicator that always seemed kind of, well, confusing.
It definitely has a reputation for being a bit dry, but leave it to Scanlon to make it engaging. She uses this fantastic analogy of a gingerbread Yeti economy.
A gingerbread Yeti economy. I'm sorry, I need to hear more about this.
It's as delightful as it sounds. Imagine a land inhabited by these giant cookie-loving Yetis.
I'm picturing it.
They've got their own little economy, right? And Scanlon breaks down their GDP using the standard formula: consumption, government spending, investment, and net exports. But she frames it all within this whimsical, gingerbread-filled world.
That's amazing. So I'm learning about GDP, but with Yetis and cookies? I'm in.
Exactly. It's surprisingly effective at making a potentially dry concept stick. And then she tackles another often misunderstood topic, government debt.
Oh yeah, that's another one that tends to make my eyes glaze over.
Right. But Scanlon challenges the idea that it's always a bad thing. She points out that when used strategically, government debt can actually be a tool for economic growth.
I've never thought of it that way. I always just assumed, like, more debt equals bad.
It's a common misconception. But think about it. If the government invests in things like infrastructure, education, or scientific research, even if they go into debt to do it, those investments can lead to long-term economic benefits, more jobs, higher productivity, that sort of thing.
That actually makes a lot of sense.
Right. And Scanlon uses this really helpful visual called the frying pan chart to illustrate how government spending, even when it leads to debt, can actually help to stimulate the economy, especially during recessions.
Okay, I have to see this frying pan chart. It sounds like an economic game changer.
It's a great visual. It shows how sometimes you need to spend money to make money, even at a government level.
I'm starting to feel a lot more economically enlightened over here. So we've covered vibes, the history of money, supply and demand, GDP, and even government debt. What else is in Scanlon's economic toolkit?
Well, she also delves into the two main levers that governments use to try to influence the economy: fiscal policy and monetary policy.
All right, break those down for me, and if you can work in any more food analogies, I'm all ears.
Okay, so let's stick with our gingerbread Yeti theme, shall we? Imagine fiscal policy as the government's giant oven, okay?
Okay, I'm with you.
This oven has all sorts of knobs and dials that they can adjust to control the temperature of the economy.
I like where this is going.
So, let's say the economy is cooling down a bit, like maybe it's a bit slow to rise.
Okay, gotcha.
The government might use fiscal policy to heat things up. They can do this by spending more money maybe on infrastructure projects, like building new roads or bridges. That's like cranking up the oven's temperature.
Makes sense. So more government spending equals a hotter economy.
Exactly. Or they could lower taxes, which puts more money back in people's pockets, encouraging them to spend more. That's like turning on the oven's broiler for a quick blast of heat.
Oh, I'm following.
Yes.
And what about when the economy is getting too hot, like when inflation is running rampant?
That's when they might use fiscal policy to cool things down a bit. They could do this by reducing government spending, like maybe putting some of those big projects on hold or raising taxes.
So kind of like turning down the oven's temperature or maybe giving it a little time to cool off?
Precisely. It's all about finding that sweet spot, that Goldilocks temperature, where the economy is growing at a healthy, sustainable pace.
That makes sense. But what about this other lever, monetary policy? That one always seemed a bit mysterious, like something discussed in hushed tones in the halls of central banks.
It definitely has an air of mystery about it. But Scanlon does a great job of demystifying it. Think of monetary policy as the tools that a master baker uses to control the dough.
The dough being the economy. I'm liking these analogies.
Exactly. The master baker in this case is usually a country's central bank in the U.S., is the Federal Reserve, or the Fed, as everyone calls it.
The Fed. Okay, I feel like I've heard whispers about them.
They're kind of the rock stars of the financial world, even if they don't always get the recognition they deserve.
So what do these economic rock stars actually do?
They're like the conductors of the economy, using a whole orchestra of tools to keep things in tune.
Okay, so the Fed is controlling the dough, which is the economy. I'm following. But how do they actually do that? What are their tools?
Well, one of their main tools is something called interest rates.
Ah, yes. Interest rates. Those always sound important.
They are. They're like the yeast in our dough analogy. The Fed can raise interest rates to try and slow down inflation. When interest rates are higher, it costs more for people and businesses to borrow money, so they tend to spend less.
Makes sense.
And when the economy needs a little boost, maybe to encourage more borrowing and spending, the Fed can lower interest rates.
Okay, so they're kind of like the economy's thermostat, adjusting interest rates up or down to control things.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance. But here's the thing. It's not an exact science. Remember that time back in 2019 when banks were actually paying to lend money to the Fed?
Wait, what? Banks are paying to lend out their money. That doesn't seem like a very good business model.
It doesn't, does it? But that's what happened. There were all these technical factors at play, and just goes to show that even with all the data and the best intentions, sometimes these systems can behave in unpredictable ways.
It's a good reminder that economics is more than just numbers and formulas. There's a human element to all of this too, isn't there?
Absolutely. And Scanlon brings that home in the final part of her book, where she circles back to the idea that economics is ultimately about people.
Right. It's about how we make decisions, how those decisions interact, and how our collective behavior shapes the world around us.
Exactly. Remember that quote from Fed Chair Jerome Powell that she includes? He talks about how even the Fed, with all its power and influence, has to pay attention to market sentiment.
So they're basically saying they need to be aware of the vibes.
Precisely. Because those vibes, those collective feelings of optimism or pessimism, can have a very real impact on how the economy performs.
That's pretty wild when you think about it.
It is. And it shows just how intertwined psychology and economics really are.
It's all connected. So we've talked about vibes, the evolution of money, the forces of supply and demand, those powerful policy tools, and the ever-present human element. What's the big takeaway from all of this?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that while economics can feel complex and even intimidating, it's something we can all understand and engage with.
It's not just for, like, experts in ivory towers.
Not at all. It's relevant to all of us because it shapes our daily lives in countless ways.
And I think Scanlon does a fantastic job of making it accessible, even fun at times.
I agree. She doesn't shy away from the complexities, but she explains things in a way that's clear, engaging, and even humorous at times.
She had me at the gingerbread Yeti economy, I have to say.
Right. It's those kinds of creative approaches that make her book such a valuable resource. She takes what can be a dry, intimidating subject and makes it something that anyone can grasp.
And that's so important because the more we understand about how the economy works, the more empowered we are to make informed decisions for ourselves, our families, and our communities.
I completely agree. It's about moving from a place of feeling overwhelmed or intimidated to a place of understanding and agency.
Exactly. It's about feeling equipped to navigate this complex world around us, and I think Scanlon's book is a fantastic guide for that journey. Well, on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought. Economics might not always be the easiest subject to grasp, but it's one worth exploring. So stay curious, keep asking questions, and remember, you don't need to be an expert to make sense of the economy. Until next time, happy learning.